The weight of unseen sacrifices. My heart raced as I stood before my parents, clutching the acceptance letter from the university that had been my dream for as long as I could remember. The envelope, thin but heavy with promise, trembled slightly in my hands. This was it. The culmination of years of late nights, early mornings, and endless sacrifices. Every hour I had spent poring over textbooks, every moment of doubt I had pushed aside, had led to this singular achievement. It was my victory, one I had earned all on my own. Mom, Dad. I got in, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though my chest felt like it might burst from the excitement I could barely contain. I extended the letter toward them, my fingers trembling. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was everything. I wanted to see their eyes light up with pride, to hear them say they were proud of me. After years of being overlooked, I thought this would be the moment that changed everything. The moment they finally saw me, finally recognized the woman I had become. My mother took the letter from my hand, but her gaze was cold, distant. She didn't even open it. Instead, she handed it to my father, who barely acknowledged it as he placed it on the table between us. My heart skipped a beat, and the warm rush of anticipation I had felt just seconds before evaporated into an icy emptiness. Mom? Dad? Aren't you happy for me? I asked, my voice shaking now, the knot in my stomach tightening. For a long, uncomfortable moment, they said nothing. The silence between us was oppressive, heavier than I had ever experienced. It was as if I had suddenly become invisible, the years of hard work and sacrifice amounting to nothing in their eyes. And then, finally, my mother spoke. Your brother needs the money, she said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. The word struck me like a slap. What do you mean? I stammered, my mind racing to process the information. Was she serious? Did she just say that? Alex has his business to run, she continued, her gaze not meeting mine. He needs the funds to get things off the ground. He has potential, Emily. More than you do. The words felt like they had cut straight through me, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. My brother, Alex, the golden child, had always been the center of attention in this house. No matter how much I tried to prove myself, he was always the one who was supported, who was praised. I was never good enough, never quite up to par with him, despite all the effort I put in. But I got in. This is my chance, my only chance to get out of here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could already feel the tremble in my chest. My fingers clenched around the acceptance letter as though holding onto it would somehow hold on to the last thread of hope I had. You don't understand, Emily, my father interjected, his voice low and tired. Alex's business is important. We've invested so much in him. His future is riding on this. I'm not going to waste money on something that won't pay off. Waste money? The money that was supposed to be mine? The funds I had hoped would cover my tuition, my living expenses, my future? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Your future can wait, my mother added, her voice cold, final. This is what's best for the family. Alex's business could change everything for us. A bitter laugh caught in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Was that really what it came down to? Alex's dreams, his business, were more important than my own education, my own future? I had always known I was overlooked, but this felt like a slap in the face. It felt like I wasn't even seen, not as a daughter, not as a person with my own dreams. To them, I was just a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. Mom, you promised me. You said I could go to college. You said I would have a chance. I could hardly speak now, my voice choking on the bitterness rising in my throat. Her eyes flicked to mine, but there was no warmth in them, only the coldness that had settled in my chest. Your brother needs this more. He's going to make something of himself, and we're going to help him. That's the way it is. I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend the words. My world felt like it was collapsing around me. This wasn't just about money, it was about something far deeper. My entire life, I had watched Alex get everything handed to him on a silver platter. The newest gadgets, the best clothes, the most lavish vacations. I had always been the one who made do, who sacrificed so much just to get by. But Alex? Alex was the one who was always praised, always held up as the perfect child. And now, once again, I was being told that my future didn't matter. That I didn't matter. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Why does he get everything? Why does he always come first? The words tasted like venom, but I couldn't stop them from spilling out. My mother's gaze softened, but not in a way that brought me comfort. It's not about him getting everything, Emily. It's about us doing what we can to help him succeed. Your education will still be there. Right now, this is what we need to focus on. The finality in her tone left no room for discussion. I wanted to argue, to scream, to tell her how unfair this all was, but the words stuck in my throat. What was the point? They had already made up their minds. I left the room without another word, my head spinning with the weight of it all. I didn't even realize that I was crying until I was already locked in my room, clutching the acceptance letter to my chest like a lifeline. But even that lifeline felt more like a weight now, a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. My brother, Alex, would get everything, again. And I would be left with nothing but my broken dreams. The illusion of fairness. The days that followed felt like a fog, each one blending into the next. I went through the motions of everyday life, but inside, I was a storm. My heart was heavy, my mind clouded with confusion and anger. How could they do this to me? How could they betray me so completely? I woke up each morning, but the excitement I once felt for the future had evaporated. There was no longer a spark of hope to fuel my steps. Every time I glanced at the university acceptance letter, it only reminded me of the promise I had made to myself, the promise to get out of this suffocating life, to create something for myself outside of the shadows of my family's expectations. But now, that future felt like a cruel joke, something just out of my reach, forever taunting me. I tried to talk to my father, but every conversation ended the same way, with him dismissing my concerns or reminding me that Alex needed the money. As if that was all there was to it. As if my dreams, my aspirations, my worth, didn't matter. They had always been more concerned with Alex's success, and it had always been that way, ever since we were kids. I could see it clearly now, the pattern, the favoritism, the way they'd always indulged him while I was left to fend for myself. I had never been enough. Not enough to get their attention, not enough to make them proud, not enough to warrant their investment in my future. But Alex? Alex was their golden boy, their shining star. Everything he did was right. Every mistake he made was overlooked. Every whim was indulged. And now, as he built his business, they were willing to sacrifice my entire future to support him. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the years of feeling like I was invisible. It was the never-ending comparison, the constant feeling of being less than. My parents never saw me for who I was, never took the time to understand my potential. No, they were too busy seeing Alex as the only one who mattered. And I was tired of it. I found myself retreating into my thoughts more and more, thinking about how unfair everything was. I could feel the bitterness rising in me like a poison, infecting every thought, every moment. The resentment I had long buried now surfaced with an intensity one could no longer ignore. But I knew that wallowing in anger would get me nowhere. I couldn't change them, I couldn't make them see me the way I wanted to be seen. So, I turned inward, focusing on what I could control. I started to distance myself from my family. I spent more time in my room, more time alone with my thoughts, trying to find a way out of this mess. I didn't want to be angry forever, but how could I not be? How could I not feel betrayed, abandoned, and forgotten? They had taken something from me, something irreplaceable, my chance at a future. One afternoon, as I sat in my room, scrolling through the course catalog of my dream university, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alex. My heart skipped, but I quickly pushed the hope away. It wasn't like him to reach out unless he needed something. I glanced at the screen, half expecting to see a request for help or some trivial complaint about his business. "Hey, Emily. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. Was he really going to be the one to reach out now? After everything? After Mom and Dad had made it clear that I didn't matter? I had spent years watching him get everything he wanted, never once stopping to think about how his actions affected me, how his success always came at the cost of my own. I sat with the message for a while, wondering whether I should even respond. What would I say? How could I explain to him the hurt I was feeling? How could I make him understand that his place in the family, the adoration, the support, had stolen my chance at happiness? Finally, I typed a short reply. Sure. A few minutes later, I heard a knock on my door. I didn't have to open it to know who it was. I could feel his presence even before he spoke. "Hey," Alex said, poking his head around the doorframe. "Mind if I come in?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He stood there for a moment, his posture stiff and unsure, as though he was waiting for me to say something. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. It always had been. "What's up?" I finally asked, my voice colder than I intended. I couldn't help it. My feelings were still too raw, too fresh. Alex shifted uneasily. I know things have been tense lately," he said. "Mom and Dad told me about the university thing. I'm sorry you're upset." I blinked, surprised by his words. He was actually apologizing? But I quickly pushed that thought aside. This wasn't about him apologizing, this was about me being heard. This was about finally standing up for myself. "Sorry?" I repeated, my voice tight. "You're sorry? For what? For taking everything that was meant for me? For getting everything you ever wanted, while I'm left with nothing?" The words spilled out of me before I could stop them. Alex stepped back, looking genuinely shocked. "Emily, that's not fair. You know I didn't ask for all that. I never wanted to overshadow you. You're my sister. Then why does it always feel like you're the only one who matters? Why do Mom and Dad always put your needs before mine? I worked for this, Alex. I've always worked for everything I've ever had. But you? You get everything handed to you. And now I'm left with nothing." I stood up abruptly, pacing the room, trying to shake off the storm of emotions that had overwhelmed me. Alex stood silently, watching me, his face a mix of confusion and guilt. "I didn't know you felt this way," he said quietly. "Well, now you do," I shot back, feeling a sense of anger and hurt that was impossible to ignore. "And now you know how it feels to be invisible. To always be second place. To never matter." I turned away from him, looking out the window, my mind racing. What had I expected from this conversation? Was he going to suddenly apologize and make everything right? Was that even possible? The damage had been done, and nothing would ever be the same again. "I'm not the enemy, Emily," Alex said softly. "But I get it now. I really do. And I don't know how to fix this, but I'll try. For you. I don't want you to feel like you don't matter." I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. The words I had been holding in for so long now hung between us, but they didn't feel like they had the power to heal anything. Maybe the real battle wasn't with Alex or Mom and Dad. Maybe it was with myself, learning to let go of the anger and resentment that had taken root in my heart. But was I strong enough to do that? The moment of reckoning. The days that followed my conversation with Alex were a blur. The apology, if you could call it that, had done little to ease the weight on my heart. The words had hung in the air for a while, each one a fragile attempt at mending something that felt irreparably broken. I was still angry. Still hurt. Still betrayed. But, for the first time, I began to realize something. No matter what Alex said, no matter how much he apologized, he wasn't the source of my pain. I was. The realization hit me like a jolt, a sudden burst of clarity that left me breathless. I had spent so much time blaming my family, blaming Alex, blaming my parents for the injustice I had endured, that I hadn't stopped to look at the part one had played in my own suffering. The anger I had carried around for so long had become a shield, a way to protect myself from the deeper truth. That I was the one who had allowed myself to stay small, to accept being overlooked. I had convinced myself that I was nothing more than the forgotten child, the one who was always second best. But why had I done that? Why had I let the actions of others define my worth? I stared at the university acceptance letter once again, the same one that had been a symbol of rejection just days ago. It still felt heavy in my hands, but now it was different. It wasn't a reminder of my failure. It wasn't a symbol of what I couldn't have. No, now it felt like an invitation to step out of the role I had been assigned my entire life. I had always been the quiet one, the invisible one, the one who stayed in the background while Alex shone in the spotlight. But that was a role I had allowed myself to play. I had let myself be defined by their choices, by their favoritism, by their neglect. I had convinced myself that I wasn't worthy of anything more. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I knew I had more to offer the world, more to give, more to achieve. And I had spent far too long convincing myself otherwise. I wasn't going to let this define me anymore. It was time to take control. I began to think about what I wanted for my life, beyond the walls of this house, beyond the reach of my parents' influence. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. It was small, tentative, but it was there. I couldn't change my family. I couldn't make them see me the way I wanted them to. But I could change the way I saw myself. I could take my future into my own hands. The next few days were a blur of action. I started researching scholarships, looking into ways I could still make my dream a reality. I found opportunities one hadn't even considered before, places that offered financial aid for students in my situation. There was a part of me that still felt like I was fighting against a tidal wave of expectations and obligations, but there was another part of me, a stronger part, that was pushing back. I wasn't going to let my dreams slip away just because my family didn't see them as worthy. It wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't afraid of hard work. I had always been the one who did the grunt work, the one who persevered when the odds were stacked against me. I had always been strong, even when I didn't realize it. And this time, I was going to use that strength to fight for myself. The next time I saw my parents, it wasn't with the same desperation or hopelessness I had carried before. No, this time, I was different. I was no longer waiting for their approval, their validation. I had come to terms with the fact that I might never get it. But I didn't need it anymore. Not in the way I thought I did. I walked into the living room one evening, where my parents were seated on the couch, talking quietly. When they saw me, there was a brief moment of silence, as if they were waiting for me to say something. I had been avoiding them, retreating into my room for days, but now I was ready to face them head-on. I had made my decision. "I'm going," I said, my voice steady, more confident than I had ever sounded before. My mother's eyebrows furrowed, and my father's gaze shifted from the TV screen to me, his expression unreadable. "Go where?" my mother asked, her voice tight with disbelief. "What do you mean, going?" "I mean I'm going to college. I'm not waiting around for you to change your mind. I've found other ways to pay for it. I paused, steadying myself. I've realized something. I've been waiting for your approval for far too long, but I don't need it anymore. There was a long pause, and then my father spoke, his voice gruff. This isn't just about money, Emily. You can't just ignore the fact that we've been supporting your brother. His future is uncertain, Anne. I know, I interrupted, my voice firm. But so is mine. I don't need to depend on you anymore. I can make this work on my own. For a moment, there was only silence. My parents exchanged a look, one that I couldn't read. It wasn't anger, nor was it approval. It was something else. A realization, maybe. Or regret. But they didn't say anything more. I'll make it work, I repeated, more to myself than to them. I'll prove to you, and to myself, that I'm worthy of my future. And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, not waiting for their response. The decision had been made. My path was clear. The strength within. The days after that conversation felt like a long, uncharted road ahead of me. I had taken the first step, but the path was still unclear, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could walk it alone. Yet, I knew there was no turning back. My resolve had been tested, but the fire that burned inside me had only grown stronger. This wasn't just about going to college anymore. This was about reclaiming my life, my voice, my choices, my future. I had spent so many years in the background, suffocating under the weight of others' expectations, and now, I was stepping into the light, even if it meant doing it alone. The first hurdle was financial. I couldn't rely on my parents, not after what had happened. I would have to be resourceful, find my own way. I spent every free moment researching scholarships, grants, and alternative ways to fund my education. It was overwhelming at times, the weight of the future pressing down on me, but I kept pushing forward. I knew what I wanted, and that alone was enough to fuel me. One evening, after hours of searching through financial aid websites, I found a scholarship that seemed almost too good to be true. It was for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who had demonstrated resilience in the face of adversity. It didn't just cover tuition, it also provided living expenses, books, and even a stipend for travel. It was the lifeline I needed, the ticket to my future. I spent the next few days preparing my application, crafting essays that highlighted my struggles, my achievements, and most importantly, my determination. I poured every ounce of emotion I had into those words, because this wasn't just a scholarship application. This was my declaration that I was worth investing in. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't second place. I was someone who had fought for everything, and I was going to keep fighting. As I sat in my room, typing the final sentences of my essay, I felt a surge of pride. It wasn't just the words on the screen that filled me with satisfaction. It was the realization that I had done this on my own. No one had held my hand through the process. No one had given me advice or direction. This was my fight, my journey, and I was winning it. But despite the excitement that bubbled within me, there was still the nagging voice of doubt that crept in at the edges of my thoughts. What if they didn't accept me? What if I wasn't good enough? I knew I was smart. I knew I was capable. But in a world that valued connections over grit, how could someone like me stand out? The next few weeks were filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I couldn't stop thinking about the scholarship. Every day felt like an eternity as I waited for the response. I kept up with my research, kept looking for other opportunities, but in my heart, I knew this was the one that could change everything. If I didn't get it, I would have to start over. I would have to figure out a new way to fund my education. I would have to keep proving myself. In the meantime, my family's attitude toward me hadn't changed. My mother, though not as cold as before, still didn't fully grasp the magnitude of my decision. She would sometimes ask if I had changed my mind, if I had reconsidered asking them for help, but I refused. I had made my choice. They had made theirs. The most difficult part was seeing Alex. He'd approached me a few times since that night, his attempts at conversation still awkward, like he was unsure how to relate to me now that I had stopped being the invisible sister. At first, I'd appreciated his efforts, but now I felt like I couldn't quite look at him the same way. How could I, after everything that had happened? How could I pretend that nothing had changed, when in truth, everything had shifted? One afternoon, as I was sitting in the kitchen, going over some last-minute details for my scholarship application, Alex came in, holding a cup of coffee in his hand. He paused for a moment, looking at me, like he was deciding whether to speak or not. I didn't meet his gaze, focusing instead on the papers in front of me. "Emily," he finally said, his voice hesitant. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night. About everything." I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure I was ready to talk to him, not yet. But I could feel the sincerity in his voice, and I knew that his intentions were genuine. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, and for the first time, I saw a different side of Alex, one that wasn't filled with entitlement or superiority. He was vulnerable, unsure. "I didn't realize how much you were hurt by everything. I know I've been the golden child, the one everyone focused on, but that's not your fault. It's just how it happened. And I hate that it's come to this, that we're like this now." I took a deep breath, still feeling the weight of everything between us, but I knew I couldn't carry the burden of anger forever. "Alex, I'm not angry at you," I said softly. "I'm angry at the way things have always been. But it's not just about you. It's about how I've let myself be treated. I've always been the one who stayed quiet, the one who took a back seat, because I thought that's all I could be. But I'm not that person anymore." He nodded slowly, looking at me with a mix of regret and understanding. "I get it. I don't want to be the reason you don't go after your dreams. You deserve it, Em. You really do." Something in his voice made me pause. Was this genuine? Or was it just him trying to make amends for everything he had taken for granted? I didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe it might be real. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to rebuild what had been broken between us. "Thanks," I said, my voice steady. "But I need to do this for me. I need to prove to myself that I can make it. I'm not doing it for anyone else, Alex. Not for you, not for Mom and Dad. Just for me." He smiled faintly, and I could tell he understood. "I get that. And I'll support you however I can." For a moment, I stood in the silence that followed, not knowing what else to say. But somehow, in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. I wasn't just fighting for my future anymore. I was learning to fight for myself. The scholarship application went out, and I waited. And as the days passed, I began to realize something profound. I didn't need to wait for permission to succeed. I didn't need to wait for anyone's approval. I was already on my way. The road ahead. The weeks following my submission of the scholarship application felt like an endless waiting game, each day dragging on as I checked my email obsessively, hoping for a notification. I told myself not to get my hopes up, not to let my emotions ride on a single outcome. But it was impossible to ignore the knot of anticipation that twisted tighter with each passing day. I had done everything I could, I had fought for myself in ways I never thought I was capable of. Now, all I could do was wait. During this time, my relationship with my family continued to shift, though not in the way I had imagined. Mom had become more distant, as if the decision I had made, to go against their wishes, had driven an invisible wedge between us. It wasn't outright hostility, but the warmth that had once defined our interactions was now replaced with a cold indifference. My father, ever the stoic, seemed unaffected, but I could see it in the way his eyes occasionally lingered on me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. There was no pride, no recognition in his gaze. Just a quiet, unspoken disapproval. And then there was Alex. He had kept his distance too, though his attempts at reconciliation were now more frequent. He would occasionally leave me small notes of encouragement on my desk, or ask if I needed help with anything. At first, I had appreciated it, but now it felt more like an obligation on his part, something he was doing because he felt guilty. Still, it was better than the cold silence that had defined our relationship for so long. But despite the growing distance between my family and me, I couldn't bring myself to regret the choices I had made. I couldn't deny that I was scared of the future, scared of the unknown. But the fear didn't paralyze me anymore. It drove me forward. I wasn't the girl who waited for permission anymore. I wasn't the girl who stayed silent in the corner. I was fighting for the future I deserved, no matter what it took. The day I received the email from the scholarship committee changed everything. I had just returned from a late-night study session at the local library, and I was exhausted. I had been juggling my part-time job, my preparations for college, and my responsibilities at home, and it felt like everything was coming to a head. But as I sat down at my desk, my phone buzzed with a new notification. It was from the Scholarship Foundation. For a moment, I froze, staring at the screen, unsure if I even wanted to open it. What if it was another rejection? What if I had failed despite everything? But then I remembered the words I had written in my application. I had given everything I had to that essay. I had shown them who I was, not the version of me my family expected, but the real me, the one who had fought for every opportunity. I had worked for this. I had earned this. I opened the email. "Congratulations, Emily Stevens," the subject line read. I couldn't believe it. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, my mind racing. Had I really done it? Had I really secured the funding to go to the university I had dreamed of for so long? I quickly clicked open the message, my heart pounding in my chest. "You have been selected as a recipient of the scholarship name for the 2025 academic year." I read the words again, then again. And each time, it felt more real. I had done it. I had actually done it. Tears filled my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to cry. Not out of sadness, not out of frustration, but out of pure relief and joy. I had fought for this moment, and I had won. I wasn't the second choice. I wasn't the forgotten child. I had proved that I was worthy of this, worthy of everything that was coming my way. I had taken control of my life. The next few days were a whirlwind. I called the university to confirm my acceptance, I completed all the necessary paperwork for the scholarship, and I began making plans for what life would be like after I moved away. It was hard to believe that I would soon be in a new city, surrounded by people who didn't know my past, my family, or the weight I had carried for so long. I was finally going to be free of the shadows that had loomed over me. But as excited as I was, I couldn't ignore the heaviness in my chest when I thought about my family. My parents hadn't acknowledged the scholarship at all. They hadn't congratulated me, and there were no words of pride, no expressions of joy. In fact, it was as though nothing had changed. Mom still kept her distance, and Dad remained his usual, distant self. Alex, though, seemed to be the one who had finally come to terms with my decision. He stopped by my room one evening, looking more serious than usual. "Hey, Em," he said, knocking gently on my door before stepping inside. "I heard you got the scholarship." I wanted to say, "I'm proud of you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't expected them, not really. Not from him. Not after everything that had happened. But there they were, hanging in the air, genuine and sincere. It was the first time in my life that Alex had ever truly said he was proud of me. And though it wasn't enough to heal all the wounds of the past, it was a start. It was something. And that something meant more than I ever thought it would. "Thanks," I said, my voice thick. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears at bay. "It means a lot to me, Alex." He nodded, and for a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us not uncomfortable, but understanding. We had both come a long way, and maybe, just maybe, we were starting to rebuild something that had been lost. "Good luck, Em. I'll be rooting for you," he said, before turning and walking out. As the door closed behind him, I leaned back against the wall, feeling an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. I had no idea what the future held. I didn't know if my family would ever fully accept me, or if things would ever be the same between us. But for the first time, I realized that I didn't need them to validate me anymore. I was enough. I had always been enough. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there were still many challenges to face. But now, I wasn't afraid of them. I wasn't afraid of the future. Because I had proven to myself that no matter what, I could survive. I could thrive. And that was all that mattered. A new beginning. The weeks before leaving for university were a blur. There was so much to prepare, so many details to iron out, and yet, the closer I got to the moment of leaving, the more it all seemed surreal. I'd spent my entire life dreaming of this, a life away from the stifling expectations, away from the shadows of my family's priorities. But now that I was finally on the verge of making that dream a reality, it felt like stepping into an entirely new world, one that was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. Packing my things, saying goodbye to the small town I had spent my entire life in, felt like the closing of a chapter. I stood in my room, surrounded by boxes and bags, each one filled with a piece of my past, ready to be tucked away and left behind. And as I looked around at the familiar walls, the cluttered desk, and the window that had always looked out over the same street, I couldn't help but wonder what life would be like on the other side. I knew I was walking away from a lot, my family, my history, the familiar struggles that had defined my entire existence. But at the same time, I was walking towards something new, something that had the potential to be everything I had ever wanted. A life where I wasn't the second best choice, a life where I could finally be free of the expectations and disappointments that had always hung over me. The night before I was set to leave, my parents said nothing. They hadn't even acknowledged the scholarship or the fact that I was about to embark on a new chapter of my life. In a way, it didn't surprise me. They had always been indifferent to my dreams. But there was still a part of me that had hoped they would say something, anything, that might show they were proud, or that they were at least glad I was finally taking control of my life. But that was the thing. I couldn't depend on them for validation anymore. I had learned that the hard way. The only person who acknowledged my departure was Alex. He came into my room late that evening, his hands in his pockets, looking almost nervous. I was packing a few last things into my suitcase, the steady shuffle of clothes against fabric filling the silence between us. He began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about everything, and I don't know. I guess I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. For everything. And I hope you know that, even if it didn't feel like it before, I'll always be here for you. I hope you make it." I stopped what I was doing and turned to look at him, really look at him. For so many years, Alex had been the one to walk the path laid out for him by our parents. He had been their golden child, their pride and joy, while I had been the one left to fade into the background. But now, here he was, offering me something that felt rare and fragile, genuine support. Maybe it wasn't perfect, and maybe it didn't erase the years of neglect, but it was something. And in that moment, it was enough. "Thanks," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "I know I've been hard on you, but I really do appreciate it. More than you know." He gave me a small, tentative smile. "I know. I'm sorry for everything that happened. But you don't have to keep fighting this alone, you know. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you can count on me." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. For a moment, I felt a crack in the wall I'd built between us, a moment of real connection. It wasn't perfect, but maybe that was okay. The past couldn't be erased, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could begin to heal, little by little. The next morning, I said goodbye to my childhood home. There were no grand goodbyes, no tearful farewells from my parents. I wasn't sure if I was disappointed by that or relieved. But I had come to realize that I couldn't wait for their approval any longer. This was my journey, and they would either come to accept it or they wouldn't. I couldn't control that. All I could control was how I moved forward, and moving forward was exactly what I was determined to do. As I drove away from the house, my suitcase packed in the trunk, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and freedom. My past was behind me, but it had shaped me into who I was today. I had survived it all, and now, I was walking towards something better. A future that was mine to shape. The first few weeks at university were overwhelming. The campus was huge, full of people who didn't know my name, my story, or my struggles. It was intimidating at first, to be just one face in a sea of hundreds, but it also felt liberating. No one knew my history. No one expected anything from me. I could finally breathe. Classes were challenging, of course. The workload was heavy, and at times, I felt like I was drowning in assignments and deadlines. But I also found a part of myself that I hadn't known existed, a part of me that was resilient, determined, and unafraid to face the difficulties that came with being a first-generation college student. I had fought my way here, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I joined a few campus clubs, made some friends, and even started to feel like I belonged somewhere. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself, when I questioned whether I was capable of succeeding. But each time that fear crept in, I reminded myself of everything I had already overcome. I wasn't just here by chance. I was here because I had earned it. As the months went by, I became more and more certain that this was where I was meant to be. It wasn't just about the degree or the job that might come afterward. It was about proving to myself that I could be more than what I had been told I was. It was about breaking free from the confines of my past and carving out a future that was mine alone. There were still moments when I thought of my family, when I missed the familiar comforts of home, or when I wished things could have been different between us. But with each passing day, I grew stronger. I realized that I didn't need their approval to succeed. I didn't need them to validate me. I had already proven everything I needed to prove, to myself. And that was enough.